Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is a Greensboro-bound event, and we've been doing a long series of Zoom conversations ever since our festival was canceled last May, rightfully so, but because of the awful COVID circumstances. So this is great that we're able to bring writers on and celebrate their books, especially as they're just released, as Kasey's new book is Lord, the One You Love is Sick. This is Kasey's great new book. I'm going to let Drew talk about that in just a minute. So Greensboro Bound, we're a festival, a literary festival, and our big festival happens every May. And this year we are going to have one. It just will be virtual. So May 13 to 16, we are really kind of thrilled by what we're putting together. It's going to be organized around this idea of 21 conversations. We'll have 21 writers from North Carolina in conversation with 21 writers from around the country or world. So there's just some great little, juxtapositions and synchronicities happening with these conversations. There's some things I can't tell you yet, but, we have Billy Collins will be there in conversation with Ron Rash. That sounds exciting to me. Mm-hmm. Nettie Okorafor will be part of our festival, who's just remarkably prolific and fascinating writer. Kasey Taylor will be here. Kasey Taylor wrote Overground Railroad. And Kasey will be in conjunction with Magnolia House, which was an Overground Railroad site hotel here in Greensboro. So that will be a great event. And so many other just lovely, lovely things will be happening. So stay tuned. We'll get that schedule out probably March-ish to let you know what to look forward to. All right. But tonight we are here for Kasey Thornton and conversation with Drew Perry. I'm going to introduce Drew and let Drew do the honors for Kasey. Drew he's a friend of mine. And Drew lives here in Greensboro, teaches writing at Elon. But this is great. I read Drew's book before I knew him, which is nice, to make friends afterwards, because then you can say, oh, I loved your book, and you're not friends yet, so you're not lying, right? You can just, be honest about it. And this is really, kids these days, it's just it's a satire for sure, but, of Florida life, real estate. But it's also just really, as Dave Barry says, it's sweet, soulful, smart, and funny as hell. And maybe that's a good description of you, Drew. What do you think? Is that too much? I kind of think it is. He also is the author of This Is Just Exactly Like You, which is his first book. And these books win prizes, of course. And, probably most of us know Drew from his Our State column all these years, which has just been a tender, sometimes difficult look at the parenting life. Right. I wonder how your kids are going to take those in 10 years, Drew, but that's your
we'll let them sort that out when the time comes.
Anyway, thank you, Drew, for doing this and welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So just so I don't forget to circle back and say this, I knew Kasey before I read her book, but I'm not lying. That book is absolutely gorgeous. She asked me to read it over the summer and I failed to right away. And she wrote back and was like, Ken, you think you could do this? We've got a deadline coming up. We'd really like a blurb. And I was so honored just to be asked. But then I read it at the pool. We have been completely COVID locked down, except that we joined the pool this summer because we could sign up for a specific slot when almost nobody was going to be there. And I could let the lifeguards watch the boys and I could get some reading done. But I think it's almost cliche to say, but I absolutely lost track of time and of the world reading this book, Kasey. It's so great and was such this is the first time I've had a former student publish like this. And I don't know if that makes me old or lucky or both, but I absolutely love your novel. Kasey, I don't have a formal introduction ready for you. I have fancy notes, I promise, but I thought this would be easier for us to just go ahead and talk a little bit, but I want everybody to know that Kasey studied at Elon University, was in an introductory creative writing class that I taught. I was lucky enough to have her. There's a thing, my wife, Tita Ramirez, also teaches at Elon, also teaches creative writing. And you see a million stories a year, okay? A million poems a year. And every now, not a million, but thousands. And one comes across the desk that's just absolutely alive. And often enough, it's raw because the student is 18, 19 years old, but it's alive in a way that it's got a thing that that you know you can't teach. The teaching of creative writing is really teaching students, teaching writers how to teach themselves how to write. And when it's alive, you know, and you hope that the writer will stick with it. And Kasey has stuck with it. And here's this gorgeous first novel in stories. The back of the book says it's a novel in stories, but one of the things I want to talk to you, Kasey, about is taking issue with that. I think it's a novel in voices. I'm not 100% sure. I think often enough we put novels and stories in these compartmentalized boxes, and yours seems to be wanting to push at the edges of that box. Anyway, Kasey graduated from Elon in 2012 and did graduate work at the MFA programs at North Carolina State and UNC Wilmington. She has this gorgeous new book set in Bethany, North Carolina, which could damn near be any town smaller than Greensboro. But hi, Kasey, how are you?
Hello.
What have you been up to?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do want to thank Scupper Dog and for their Greensboro Bound series and allowing us to do this safely, but still maintain the sort of community of it all. So that means a lot at a time like this, which is so difficult. Did you want me to read? Is reading now?
No, let me talk to you for just a second and then we'll hear about this book. Like, how have you been doing? What's it like to bring a book out at this time? How are you feeling?
It's so weird because I already don't know what to expect from the process. And so I feel like everyone in the process didn't really know what to expect from the process either, which was kind of beautiful because I think that we leaned on each other in ways that we perhaps wouldn't. I got very close with my agent at Laura Gross Literary Agency. She's here. That's Lauren Scoville. She's here. That's her. And so it allowed us to get very close. We only met each other in person once. And so we were already sort of doing this thing virtually. But I just, I tell people when they buy the book, friends, I'm like, I don't expect anyone to do any reading right now if it's not comfortable. Like, I'm not going to be approaching you for the next month and be like, have you read it? Have you read it? Have you read it? I understand that it's a very strange time to be committing oneself to the written word, but the people who have read it have been very validating and very kind. And that's meant a lot during a year that's been challenging.
Yeah, I think at first I found it hard to read, but then this notion that you can escape into a novel or fall into another world became really true for me all summer long and all fall long. And I will tell people a little bit about your book so that you don't have to, and then we can get you to read from it a little bit. But this is, and correct me wherever you feel like I'm getting it wrong, but it's a sort of symphonic portrait of small town North Carolina, Bethany, North Carolina, told through the voices of principally 2 or 3 or 4 of the folks who live there, but then we break into, and I think this is the chapter you're going to read from, a kind of there's a diner sort of not at the center of the story, but at the center of the town that serves as the kind of Grand Central Station or the heart of the town, and it's where you go in the morning to get your sausage and biscuits. It's where you go in the evening to get your Doritos and Miller Lite. Or no, sorry, that's the convenience store on the edge of town. But just it's the story of a town that discovers that things that don't happen here, in fact, do happen here, and reckons with that over the course of years, really. But Kasey, you did say you were going to read from it, and I just thought we could start there so that people could hear what this book sounds like.
Sure. So not a lot of background that you need, but yeah, this is what we affectionately refer to as the table of knowledge at a place called Austin's Diner. And if you have a diner in your town, I guarantee you there is a table of knowledge. There is a table where, the old patriarchs of the town all come to sit and hang out and talk about the world through their own lenses. And so we have 4 older gentlemen that are here. We have Mitchell Cantor, who really wants people to know it's his 65th birthday without outright telling them. We have Johnny Barnes, who cuts his plants in the shape of apocalyptic creatures, which I hope tells you all you need to know about him. We have Sammy Cotter, who hangs his lawnmower by a swing set in order to get under it and fix it. And then Roy Friedman, who listens to way too much NPR. And, we all know someone like that too. And so this is at the beginning of the morning when everyone is still sort of walking in and putting their orders in. Roy Friedman came in next, puffing air into his hands. Morning, boys. Morning, Roy. NPR was a damn mess this morning. Now, why the hell do you listen to it if it's only going to make you mad? Sammy asked for the 100th time. I like the commercials. What say, Mitch? It's my birthday. Oh, Roy said solemnly. He patted Mitchell's shoulder and sat down in the last remaining chair. I know I'm going to need some strong coffee to deal with what the Democrats in the House did yesterday. I'm sure you'll tell us all about it, Johnny said, folding his newspaper so the daily crossword was all he could see. They no longer had to wait for Floyd Underwood, who was always late because he'd passed a few years back. Jesus, had it been that long? So now that all were present, they partook in their various first courses, a humble array of eggs and sausage and bacon and biscuits and grits so buttered that they were actually yellow. Mitchell wanted molasses on his biscuit, but Austin said, no, it's not a free country when your wife, God bless her, keeps tabs on you even when she's asleep, but she's a good woman. Sergeant Simmons came in at 6:15, looking exhausted. What say, Sims? Roy asked. What's the news this fine morning? Shoo, is all the man said, drawing the word out bitterly and shaking his head. Oh, I hear you, Mitchell attempted. It's my birthday, 65. The sergeant took his hat off to rub his cold, balding head. He looked weary and his voice was hoarse. We found Jackson Hatcher's little girl dead in the damn woods by Cooley's Pond last night. Johnny looked up from his crossword suddenly and Roy put his coffee down. In the quiet of the tiny diner, Austin nearly dropped the Tropicana pulp-free he was pouring for himself. No one said anything until Mitchell whispered, damn, what the hell happened? Shot right in the head. Lord have mercy, Johnny muttered. Did she get popped by a hunter? Don't know yet, but you know Jackson's wife got in that car accident last week and just died at the hospital, and his older girl's gone missing, and now his little girl's at the funeral home. Roy looked absolutely confused. For all of his time dabbling in specific niches of politics, actual human suffering rarely came into the discussions he listens to. Mitchell didn't know what to think either. He felt like he had just seen Jackson's wife Sarah a few days ago, but hell, everything felt that way to him now. Jackson was just working on my truck the other day, Sammy said. The sergeant shook his head wearily. Damn fucking mess, excuse my language. There ain't no kids in here, Austin said quietly from behind the counter, dumping a big bag of ice into the back of the Coke machine, probably trying to figure out the last time he'd seen the little Hatcher girl. Say what you want, it's been a hard night. Well, Dale will straighten it all out, Roy finally said with a nod. The young officer had grown up in Bethany, so he must have grown up right. Good guy. He's got an eye for this sort of thing. Well, ain't nothing like this sort of thing ever happened here, Sammy muttered. Well, poor Dale's the one that found her, Simmons said. He's a wreck. Jesus Christ, Sammy said, rubbing his eye roughly like there was something in it. Austin put a piece of sausage and a slice of orange American cheese and some egg on a biscuit and gave it to Simmons, waving off the $5 bill and shaking his head. Go on home and get you some rest. Reckon I will. You boys stay out of trouble. The little joke fell flat today. The happy Christmas bells sounded mournful when Simmons left, and Johnny shook his head. I know Samantha will want to do something for Jackson. Damn, it's like something straight out of Job. I can't imagine. She was a sweet kid. The other men grunted their affirmation, but the truth of the matter was that she really was not a sweet kid at all. She was a clever kid, a cute kid, a mischievous kid, but sweet was not the word anyone would use to honestly describe her. She was the town urchin. She frightened her Sunday school teachers and bullied her classmates, and then had the gall to bring her scrawny rear to Austin's to mope around for food all afternoon. Johnny swore up and down that he saw her snatch a 10 out of the collection plate one Sunday, and Sammy's grandson, a football player, came home from a field day with a busted cheek from a rock he said Emma Hatcher threw. Good arm, at least. Sweet kid, Sammy muttered again.
Thanks. I'll do it unmuted. So that chapter is the only one that doesn't lock into one specific point of view. As if I'm not wrong, that sort of rotates around the 4 men at the table. And then the chapter that precedes it is in first person, and all of your other chapters are sort of third limited to one character at a time.
Right.
Would you be willing to talk a little bit about how not necessarily the structure, although go ahead and do that too, but like how the voices came to you, or how this novel came to you, what it was like to have this many people in your head at the same time?
Yeah, so this novel didn't come to me until very, very, very late in the game. A lot of these stories were stories that I wrote in creative writing programs like at Elon and then UNCW. And and state. And then I was facing down my MFA thesis at NC State. And that's always kind of intimidating when you don't know what you're going to do. And especially if you're a short story writer and you just have this pile and you're like, how do I put all these together? And I was really stressing about it. And I went out for drinks one night with a few of the colleagues that I have that I really trust. And then Wilton Barnhart, who I was talking to, and he was, I will never forget, he was sipping on a martini. And I was, just stressing out loud to him. And he sort of said, well, don't all your stories take place in small Southern towns? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, what if it was the same town? And, he said it and like kept drinking his martini, like he hadn't just changed, the whole ball game. And so, and then kind of laying all of the stories out and seeing which characters were naturally wanting to float to other stories and where those, where those threads were. That was actually kind of fun. I had to do, I don't know if it's because I just write about the same stuff all the time, but I had to do very little in the way of actual, like rewriting to make it all work. It was really just, I used the word cameos. It was making sure characters had, cameos in different places where it made sense, but they wanted to do that anyway. So it wasn't a lot of work. Me and my agent did decide that it needed one more. And so that's when I wrote Lead Us Not, which is what I just read from, because I had talked about this table in every story. And you can only say, well, there are old men at a table that talk about everything before you have to show the audience that table. And so that sort of fell really naturally into place as well. So I think you saying it's like a novel in voices makes sense, because those voices had been there since my first class with you. Yeah. And then those same concepts kept coming up over and over again. So that's how it ended up sort of being put together. I mean, if I had, any sense, I'd call it Wilton Barnhart's book, because he's the one that I never would have thought about it on my own. It just would have been a collection of halfway decent short fiction.
Well, and it's so satisfying as a reader to come out of the end of one story and arrive at that sort of dislocating place in the first 2 pages of the next story until you realize, like, oh, this is the nurse from the other story, and now I understand who this is. And so it's a sort of strange kind, like, sometimes when you're reading a novel in multiple voices, you're like rushing through one so that you can get back to your favorite, but that's not the feeling in this book. The feeling in this book is like you're noticing, like, it turns out you've written about the way this town is connected, it feels like to me. And since you mentioned it a second ago, I remember way back when you were 18, 19 years old / 193, the old soul that you always were, like in the best way, like worrying that you couldn't write about these people, or that these people wouldn't be able to sustain a story. And so here's a softball for you / an impossible question. What does it mean for you to write about these kinds of towns, these kinds of people in this sort of South?
For a long time, and when I was in middle school and high school, I just, filled up spiral bound notebooks with like the most grotesquely written like sci-fi and historical fiction. And like, I think I did a Western one time, and it was all very bad. But I didn't write anything about where I lived, because where I lived was where I lived, and I found it very boring. So naturally, other people would probably find it boring. Right. And it really wasn't until, and this is, this is like cheesy since the movie came out, but it wasn't until I picked up Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd, and I picked it up. I don't remember why. It wasn't required of me. I went to a bookstore and probably liked the cover or something. But I picked it up and I started reading, and I really got a sense for how she was able to sort of capture that time period in the South with like it sort of in all of its glory and all of its sort of terribleness, and on, you know, how gritty and gross and nasty it is, but also how glorious it is to sort of be surrounded by a place that's so complicated. And so that made me start thinking about actually the place where I grew up, and sort of identifying what parts I thought were boring were actually really beautiful, and things that other people would sort of not balk at, but be surprised that that's how it happened. And then I think there was a quote that it was either in your class or someone else's about going off to college and lying about where you're from and blue ribbons for butterscotch bars and tight little stitches and skirts.
Yeah, that's from that book. That's Sandra Alcázar's book of poetry, the title of which escapes me, but it's got to be right here. Hang on, keep talking.
Okay. But it, you know, I read so many different things once I got to Elon that it was past just write what you know. It, you know, people say that, but I lived in a place that was infinitely beautiful and infinitely awful. And it was not nearly as boring as I thought once I went off to college and could see it kind of from a distance. But I think I struggled a lot sort of feeling like I could get into the heads of people that I didn't know these people. Everyone says, oh, you must have based these characters off of people. And I think anyone who writes kind of serious fiction knows that, I mean, kind of like different qualities of them, you pick from the different people, but you know, these aren't actual people. This is fiction, but feeling like I could, for example, get into the head of a police officer, like, and that's a kind of hot button area to kind of touch. And so I dated a police officer for a long time, and I had him, you know, we're very good friends now, and I had him read over everything the entire time I wrote it. But it was this sense of like not being qualified enough that I just had to kind of get over.
You seem to have an enormous compassion for everybody in here, including this really, really broken police officer. You want to talk about writing into characters who you know are flawed and who they themselves know are flawed?
I think something big that I am interested in just in general is the idea of forgiveness and who deserves it and who doesn't. And is there any hope for abusive people, or do we just, you know, cast them off to Greenland and forget that they ever existed? So it's sort of who deserves rehabilitation and who doesn't. And so I didn't feel like I could adequately cover that until I could sort of put someone that we liked in a situation where abuse can happen. You know, there are certain things that can happen to one's brain that can allow you to treat people in ways that you would not have treated them otherwise. And so I really wanted to have readers sort of think about that and think about, well, I mean, we live in a time where abusers are just sort of, you know, send them to Greenland, and some of them, absolutely, I would agree with you. But I think that there are some who want help and want to be saved and don't want to be how they are. And so I think those people we are allowed to look at, and we are allowed to offer them a hand. And it's hard. That's a hard, I mean, I still lay in bed and sort of bat that topic around, and I know a lot of people do.
I think it's one of the things that kept me reading this book, though. And, you know, having just read it again the second time through yesterday, I just marvel at your compassion for all of these characters, even up until the point of them breaking or the point of the reader breaking with the characters. As long as we're on the hot button stuff, the notion of the good man, he's a good man, he wouldn't be capable of X or Y, even as we're as we're discovering that he's capable of X or Y. Mm-hmm. So you've got that notion here. And also it strikes me that in this novel, the men are often lying to themselves and the women are often speaking the truth. Do you want to pull on that thread a little bit?
I mean, I hadn't really put that together, but
I mean, that may just be the way the world operates. We men may frequently enough lie to ourselves because we can't, we don't want to look down the barrel of whatever that is.
Yeah.
And because society lets us not, we get let off the hook, and of course women don't.
Yeah, and I think that women are, for better or for worse, sometimes, especially in the South, put in a situation where they save and sort of uplift the man and stand by your man. And so women are sort of in the bit that I read, Mitchell Kanner's wife has gone to Austin and said, do not let him have the sugar in the pink pack. He's going to think that he can have it. He can't have it. And so now Mitchell has to sort of live in a world where his wife is looking out for him even when she's in bed asleep. And so, it could be that, and, Nettie is having to take care of her son and she's in this terrible position. And so, I don't know. I've never thought about the sort of the split between them. But as far as the good man goes, I think we in the South are desperately afraid of everything else. We are deathly afraid of any concept or mindset or architectural style that comes and sort of encroaches on what we think is ours. And so having good men sort of what we feel are standing guard against that is very, very important. It's very important that we look after our boys in blue and that we sort of uphold, the first responders, the firemen, anyone standing between us and the sort of chaos of everything else are going to be sort of heralded and uplifted. And then there's always women behind them sort of like, Charlie sort of struggling to prop them up.
Interesting. All right. Let me mention to the people watching at home that if y'all want to ask questions of Kasey, you can send them to me or to Brian in the chat, and I will be able to ask them for you. I'm going to switch gears on you, Kasey, just a second so that we can open a second sort of universe of questions. We've talked a ton about the book and about the South.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you just a little bit about your writing process, sort of what it looks like when you sit down at the desk. Deep in the acknowledgments, you thank a string of people for helping you with your fear of the desk. And if this is a place you don't want to go, then we don't have to go there. But it can be really hard to sit down. And I think sometimes people think that that novelists just roll up to the desk, write a chapter, and then go drink some coffee. You want to talk about just what it's like to have a good day and what it's like to have most other days?
I have my my attic where my typewriter is, and I just like shut the door on the world, and that's what I do. No, as far as my process goes, I use triggering images a lot. Most of these stories were built. I had this one sort of tiny little thought, and then I built around them.
You mean the Richard Hugo Triggering Town type image, like that kind of thing?
I think that sounds right.
Would you explain to people so we don't do inside baseball, what you mean by a triggering image?
So I'm trying to think of an example in the story. In Out of Our Suffering, there's a little girl, and the image that I had was kids learning the cast of Amontillado. Am I saying that right?
The Poe story, Cask of Amontillado? Yeah.
Yes.
That features in the beginning of that story, yeah.
Yeah. And so I remembered when I was a kid that I could never pronounce it, and I always said armadillo. And so I did it to the point where my teacher would get mad and she would make me go put my name on the board, which was like discipline back then. And that's where I started on that story. And, that's my little monster story that I was scared to show people, perhaps for good reason. But that one sort of memory is what I built around. I was like, that memory and that idea of a kid that can't pronounce amontillado and she keeps saying armadillo, that is a child that's kind of worth writing about. And it's not me, but and there are other stories, you know, the one at the end where there's a woman living in the barn. I always wondered, you know, riding through the country, why, you know, homeless people didn't just take up in barns. Homeless people from the city should walk out to the country and just live in the barns. And so that was the funny sort of question that that started that story. So my stories start. I have a partner who is also an author, and he writes from beginning to end. He writes top to bottom. He doesn't stop. He doesn't deviate. You know, he doesn't allow for, you know, stringing through different things. And he sort of marvels that I can take like a tiny little thing and then start writing around it. I might write the next few paragraphs and then the paragraphs that come before it, and it all just builds from that one thing. And I suppose that is one explanation for a triggering image.
And so is it messy? Are you learning to hear the story as you go? Like you finish on a Tuesday and you finish your work on a Tuesday and you're not sure what you have, but you know it's live. Is it something like that? Or
I was also a straight A student. So, and that means nothing. That means nothing except that that perfectionism scares me away from the blinking cursor a lot. Like if I can't write the sentence on like perfectly the first time, then you might as well not. So I am very big on revision. And once I have the sort of bare bones of something, that's when I can go in and start adding meat in different places. And it sort of fans out from there. I am not a top to bottom writer. If I even tried to do that, I would nothing would ever get done.
Okay, but the structure of this novel feels super intricate, and I think having read it, the people tonight wouldn't be surprised to hear you say you had it like right from the get-go. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about how you managed time and structure here? So that, you know, we've got that first story. I think I don't give anything away by saying that Gentry dies in that first story, and then we leap forward 3 years by my math, and then the novel moves sort of, you know, stretches out and compresses. How did you get that straightened out? Can you just talk about sort of discovering what the novel was and sort of the choices you made about what its scope was going to be?
Yeah, I think that the timing between, and I actually had someone tell me that they didn't like the book because they couldn't tell what the time was, which, I mean, that's a fair point. It didn't matter or anything. But I think that what I was thinking about is if I'm starting this chapter with a character that's dealing with a particular issue, how much time did that character need to get to that place? You know, we see Charlie and Dale relatively happy in the first story, and then I needed for them to get to a place where they were unhappy. And that doesn't happen in a month. That happens over like a string of just a terrible amount of time, however long it is. And so that felt like years to me. So it was almost like I had characters at the end of a story and characters at the beginning, and I needed to figure out how much time needed to pass for those characters to get to the place that I needed for them to get.
Sure.
I was not working with, 1 month between every story. You know, that would have been one way of doing it, I guess, but.
So I am just going to keep asking the questions that I want to ask because people are not popping up in the chat yet. So I feel like I have these 10 free minutes that just belong to me. Because you mentioned the Dale and Charlie sections, I think we only realize later the effect to which how much Dale might be hearing ghosts. And I think we see in that first chapter that like on second reading, you certainly see it. But I think that there is a notion that, and this tracks all the way back to stuff you were talking about earlier about needing the men in blue and the first responders to keep the chaos at bay. Maybe we're also in the South and probably everywhere else for that matter. I mean, I think I'm not convinced that the Southern Gothic doesn't also belong to New England and the American West. I'm interested in the way your characters are hearing ghosts, whether actual or sort of skeletons in the closet. Could you talk about that, the way families operate in this novel?
I think that I think in this book, the ghosts are usually anger and like rage at something that's happened. I don't think that Nettie hears kind and happy voices of her dead son. I don't think that those are ghosts that she hears. She hears that like that constant all-consuming anger and frustration of not knowing what to do with the grief that she feels. I think that Dale hearing his best friend's voice as his mental health declines is almost entirely guilt, because when something like that happens, and you were their best friend and you chose to just, if your best friend has an addiction, you sometimes hit a point where you're like, I have done all I can. It's on them now. They know what resources they have. They can help themselves if they want. And then if that person dies, it's like, I should have figured one more thing out, or if I had just done this one thing, they wouldn't be dead. And so I think that that ghost is more guilt. And when I think about it, it's just the ghost of all of these like anger and the guilt and the I think that Gentry feels that anger related to his dad all the time, and it's like this sort of constant voice behind him, and the hands on his shoulders putting him forward to do different things. I think that Dale is the only one who hears the actual voice, and I am not in that story claiming that there are ghosts. I fully believe he was making that voice up in his head.
Okay. Let's see. I've got some questions from the audience now. Although before we go on, I just have to talk about the character Nettie. Y'all got to buy this book just to read Nettie's chapters, just to be with her a little bit. Such a joy. You think the book is going to belong to Dale and Charlie, and then it turns out Nettie and her son Ethan also really have a good deal of ownership in this book. And I think that's another, or at least for me, it was a real joy in reading this. It's why it doesn't really feel like I guess, sure, it's a novel in stories, but it's really just these characters who are peopling each other's stories. And in that way, it all feels like family. It feels like small town to me. It's so beautiful. Let's see. On that note, Michael Leung is saying, I haven't read your book yet, but how do you link multiple plot lines and character arcs together and intertwine them? You were talking about this a little bit with the cameos, but can you talk about, maybe just push a little bit further into how you made these stories talk to each other, these chapters talk to each other?
Yeah, I think my partner reads a lot of comic books, and so it's funny now that we're having this discussion, I can kind of see something Marvel about different characters kind of popping into each other's stories.
Well, and also like the meanwhile, up in the top of the box.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think I worked as hard on it as I think it probably looks like I did. I think that I think it happened very organically, and these characters, I didn't have to force them. I didn't have to sit down, with a whiteboard and figure out where they wanted to go, as I have with other things that have required a lot more work. I wish I could say that I worked very hard on that, but it happened. It happened very naturally, I think. And that I'm not it could just be because I write the same kind of story. They all have the same sort of, up and down that I cling so hard to. And
would you be slightly more specific about the up and down that you cling so hard to?
The Freitag model.
Oh, okay. We're just talking about the narrative rise and fall.
Right. And I don't deviate from that a lot. And so I think it's looking at the characters and seeing how other stories might have benefited by their presence or not. I think that the one problem that I faced was making sure the little girl's story didn't come out of nowhere.
There's comments in the chat about this too. So if you want to talk about Out of Our Suffering a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. What was it? What is the question?
Oh, the question is just give or take. Oh my God, what a story.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. And I wanted to make sure, I mean, that story is terrible. And so I wanted to, I don't like the concept of just abusing your readers. I don't, I have a lot of, or I would hope that I have a lot of care for my readers, and I would not want that story to, backhand them out of nowhere. And so that was one big issue, was making sure that story felt naturally placed, in which case I had to pull that family kind of out of it and spread them in different places within the book. The little girl pops her head into, she was like at the funeral, and then she was at Austin's for a time.
Right.
In another story.
And Dale knows her.
Yeah. So I think that was the one really big challenge, was making sure that story felt like it was naturally situated. It was people that I had written about, but the tone was so different. And I wasn't, and I batted around the idea like, well, I should put it in a close third as well, but it would not have, done, what it did, I don't think. I'm sure that doesn't answer your question.
No, I think you're doing fine. Tita is off camera in the living room, and she's asking if you would not mind talking about writing across gender and or across generations and experiences, like writing not just outside yourself, but way outside yourself, and what that feels like and how it is that you summon the confidence to do that.
I'm big on, if it's there is a gay individual in this book, you find out later, and I am a heterosexual woman, and so I didn't want to, for example, stick my nose in issues that I couldn't speak on, and so I actually interviewed some people that I knew grew up in small towns and asked them what that experience was like, what coming out was like, what not coming out was like. Was there fear that you might be outed? I think between that and then talking to my friend who is a police officer, if it's that far outside of myself, I'll just ask somebody, or I'll have them read over what I did. Other than that, in the small town where I came from, everyone was pretty open about the things that I would have needed to build them into a story. I don't, it is going far out of myself to write an old Southern man, but in a way it's not, because I grew up with them and they have very little filter, and I have been hearing their stories and their, diction and the way that they deliver things and the problems that they care about and the problems they don't care about my whole life. And so I suppose that I could see that as being far out of myself. And old Southern women, same thing. I've heard them talk my entire life. And so I think the answer would be, if it's that far outside of myself, I would either A, not write it, or B, just ask someone. I try to be very aware of where my limitations are. I try.
Laura Gross is in the chat asking if you still hear the characters in your head, if there might be more stories about them.
There are more stories for sure. Nettie never really leaves you. I think with Nettie, I'm probably looking into my future a bit, and so she's already kind of there. But there are more stories and from this world that are coming, and more problems that a small town that don't happen in small towns, but they do now. So that is coming, I hope, sometime in the future.
Here, I'll ask the miserable question. Like, instead of what are you working on right now, are you able to work? Is it so loud that you can or can't? Are you doing like pre-work? Are you reading and thinking? Are you taking long walks? Like, What are your days looking like right now?
I write a little bit every day, but it's not necessarily anything that will go anywhere. I try to at least, if it's a paragraph, if it's a page, if it's a sentence, I try to write a little bit every day, because I think that I have this image of my creative self as like this wheel, and if it gets rusted, it's done. And obviously I don't think that it's like that, but I do think that if you let it stall too long, it'll be a lot harder to get going. I've been reading a lot of like essays lately. I feel like I can't situate myself too deeply into fiction, I guess. And so sort of reading something real is kind of a backdoor to getting back into reading fiction, I think. And so I have this incredible stack from all of my years in creative writing programs of you print things out, read it, bring it to class, print things out, read it. I kept all of them and they have traveled with me. And so it's this huge stack of just, stapled essays and, little poetry bits and fiction bits. And so I've actually been going back and reading things that I've already read. And similar to wanting to rewatch a show you've already seen, it's kind of that comfort of the familiar, I think.
Sure.
And it's a little easier on my brain than picking up a novel right now. I mean, I do have novels that I want to read, of course, but I think that it's a lot easier to go in through short story or in essays right now.
I've been feeling terrible for like the post-apocalyptic writers out there who are sort of living through a reality that's outpacing whatever they can think of. Do you feel like, I mean, maybe not tomorrow morning, but in some ways you might be insulated from that because you're working in a sort of hyper realist mode, but in a mode that offers up its own sort of, I don't know, localized apocalypse? Like the notion of, and this is Brian in the chat, a small town that is controlled by secrets, and a secret seems like it's just a ticking time bomb that eventually is going to go off. And so maybe you don't need the post-apocalyptic landscape. Maybe we don't need to have kids hiking through a snowy tundra.
Yeah, I think that if I'm good at nothing else, I would hope that I'm good at making those sort of mundane problems seem as big to a reader as it would be to the characters. And so if I want to make it feel like an apocalypse, I feel like I could. So my partner writes a lot of sort of apocalyptic leaning stuff, and
Apologies,
he's no, he's a mess. Like we'll be just watching the news and some, outlandish whatever will come up and he's like, well, there goes that short story. He's just getting cut off all over the place. And so, and it's hard because if you're writing near future fiction, do you talk about the coronavirus? Can you not talk about the coronavirus? It's that hard. And then if you do talk about it, is that disrespectful at this point to put it in fiction? And so, I think they have a lot more to worry about than me, I would say.
Let me just take note of the time and see if anybody else out on the chat has questions that are going unanswered. And then let me grab my little note card here. Would you talk briefly while we're waiting to see if anybody else has questions about taking chapter titles from Psalm 23 and the Lord's Prayer and sort of what you're up to there? And the title, of course, also comes from a Bible verse.
Mm-hmm. The idea of raising Lazarus from the dead has always been one of my, it's always been a biblical story that's always spoken to me in a little more, Jesus's sort of trek to Jerusalem is full of all kinds of stuff, but that's the one. It's not like turning water into wine or anything like that. That's the one that really, it was very mysterious to me as a kid. because on the one hand, Southern people to a degree are kind of weirdly obsessed with death, and I'm probably no more than anyone else. And it could be the sort of religion coming into it, and they kind of like weirdly threaten each other with the like, well, if you're afraid of death, it means that you're not right with God, or like it's this weird like nipping at each other. And so I think death is something that I'm definitely haunted by, just from the way I grew up. And so that was where the sort of Lazarus bit came from. And I think that the rest of it, it was very subtle, so subtle that I don't know if I remember right now. But I grew up in the United Methodist Church, and then there's this this is sort of push and pull of, is the Bible real or is it not, or is it applicable to us, or is it just a really nice storybook that we should all like read all the time? And those lines that we so cling to, especially at funerals, that we just like cling onto them like life rafts. I don't know if I really I know that they're applicable to different characters in those stories, but I don't know if that's enough of an answer. Like lead us not is lead us not into temptation, and
Sure.
I think that the old men sitting at the table, I think that they would, it applies especially to them in a way, because all of them have their little temptations that they, like to pretend that they don't have. But it's also deliver us from evil, and then that's the middle story. So I don't know. I'm sorry I can't answer that. That's a very good question.
Nah, I walked you into a corner, and I don't think you should have to answer for like whatever made it work for you, right? Like if that became the scaffolding on which you could hang it, that's got to be enough.
That's a really good point, though. Really good question.
I believe her name is Emma in Out of Our Suffering, who says, "I feel like our whole house does not belong to the world anymore."
Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous line inside of a gorgeous book, where you think the whole time this is going to be a book that isn't going to find that redemption that Kasey was talking about, but then it absolutely does. The experience rereading it yesterday was in a way like welcoming old friends back into my life. Like it's just an absolutely gorgeous book. All of y'all in the chat need to buy, and you need to buy from Scuppernong, our local indie.
Yes.
And I see Brian is about to lean back into this, but Kasey, what a pleasure and honor it was to talk to you and to teach you almost 10 years ago now. And as I said at the beginning, a story comes across and it's got that thing, and you just hope that person keeps writing. And I don't know that you can quite hope for what this book is, which is just powerful and gorgeous and complicated and unrelenting and compassionate about its people and its place. And I can't recommend it enough to everybody on this chat. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, and God, the book is good.
Oh, thank you so much, Kasey and Drew. Boy, Kasey, you validated Drew's teaching life, I think.
No, it's just, yeah. I got to have Kasey in the classroom. That's all that is. That's not, yeah.
But really just a high level conversation about writing, you guys. It was, fascinating. Like, we just learned so much about architecture and storytelling and about Kasey's powerful, powerful book. Thank you both so much. Before I drone on a little bit about Greensboro Bound, Kasey, I just want to offer you any last words of wisdom for us, or anything you'd like to part with?
No, I think what I always say is, if you are of a storytelling mind, don't ever stop absorbing stories wherever you can. And if that's movies, or if that's TV or video games or comic books, whatever feels comfortable to you right now in this, in this very strange time. I think that stories are stories to a degree. And I'm not an elitist when it comes to how you get them. I think that would be the only piece of advice that I would offer.
Yeah, that's pretty darn good, right? Really, yes, thank you both. That was tremendous. If we would all give a clap if we could, and we would all be together in person if we could. But these are our times. So thank you everyone for being here tonight. This is, our last Greensboro Bound conversation for a little while. We're going to focus on creating a couple of festivals. So we do have a children's festival coming in March, and then our May festival, May 13 through 16. And again, that'll be 21 conversations between 21 writers from North Carolina, maybe some of them in this room right now, and 21 writers from the outside world. So look forward to that. We'll have lots of amazing writers, some big secrets to reveal in the near future. So once again, I guess I should say, this is my responsibility as a Greensboro Bound board member, that all this happens, it costs money, and we do happily take donations. You can go to greensborobound.com, and there's a little button there you can click. You can always drop off a check at Scuppernong for Greensboro Bound, and there are lots of ways to donate to keep this really remarkable project going. We have a whole YouTube channel of these conversations that have been recorded. So anytime you want to, go back and look at this, or probably even use it for your classroom or something, you have this this opportunity. And I think any writing class could use that conversation. It was so good. All right, so let's end it for tonight. I appreciate you both spending your time. Please remember to buy Kasey's book, right? Lord, the One You Love is Sick. If you were here tonight, you're going to want it, obviously. All right, Drew, you're right. You could buy it from Scuppernong, but the important thing is buy the book, okay? Kasey's time is all volunteered, so let's support her as best we can. And don't forget, Drew Perry lives here. He's one of the reasons we love Greensboro. Kids These Days is a super good book. And Kasey Thornton is not the only writer Drew is out there influencing, thank goodness. All right, thank you both so much. Have a great night, everyone.